Hello Woodworms, I'm Ray Defterius, and this is the Hand Tool Book Review. Before we get going with the video, I'd just like to thank Brett from Crow Hollow Woodwork. Brett, your patronage allows me to do things like this, and so today I'm going to take you through the shop and just show you some of the tools that I use. In forthcoming episodes, I'm going to be focusing quite a lot on books about hand tools, and I thought that this would help contextualize the things I'm using, the mistakes I've made, and what I've arrived at after 2 or 3 years of doing hand tool woodworking. So let's get into it. I think probably one of the first things is hand planes, and over here we've got what I've arrived at. This bench used to be covered in hand planes. I think I had 13 of the bench planes at one stage, from a number 3 all the way through to a number 8. I had a 5.5, I had a 4.5, 2 4.5s actually. I had a whole selection of records that I'd bought and restored. But eventually after time I whittled down to these. So here I have my number 2 super smoother, a number 4, the bronze D. Nielsen, that's a typical smoothing plane. I have a number 5, and I have a number 7, which I use as my jointer. Frankly, the number 8 was just too big for me. I didn't enjoy it a lot. So that's quite a small selection. You might say, well, don't I miss anything? Frankly, not at all. I'm a little bit nervous about using the number 5 for rough work, so I do tend to use one of my old number 5 records for just hogging off material. But up here I have the 2 scrub planes that you saw me make on a previous video, and I use those for rough stock removal quite a lot. Chisels run the typical gamut from, I guess this is a 1.5 inch, an inch all the way down to the smallest one over here. I think for anyone who's getting into this, a couple of sizes. I think a 3/4 is a particularly good size. You might look at getting something in the region of 1/4 inch. A couple of good chisels I'd suggest that sharpen well are much better than a whole selection of matching ones. You certainly don't need 10 or 15 of them up on the wall. Having said that, I've got all these mortise chisels at the bottom. That's just sheer tool acquisition disorder. The 16 is really good. I know a lot of people say that you don't need a big one, but I've really enjoyed this for when you're doing large scale construction. When I put the workbench together, that was my go-to, and I've used it quite a lot. Surprisingly useful, even though it is quite big. Number 8 down here, number 6, and sorry, these are all in metric sizes. That's how I bought them, and that's how they were labeled. I also have this big number 2 inch guy over here. I don't think I've ever used him. And going to the shelf a bit here, I've got a long paring chisel, a slick type setup that was suggested to me. Again, haven't got a lot of use out of that. I think that probably the worst speciality tools that I ever bought were these crank neck chisels. It seems like such a functional tool and such a good way of clearing out the bottom of dados, but frankly I find that I forget that I've got them half of the time. At least they're up on the wall now. They weren't for a long time, but I forget them when I needed to clean out the bottom of a dado. And the other problem I find with them is that the bottom of your dados really don't need to be that perfect. I mean, I think if you close to your line and you've got some basic chisel skills with the bench chisels, it's usually much easier to just whack that out. If you do need a perfect one, that's when I'll head over here and grab the router plane and true up the bottom of the joints. So that's planes and chisels. The rasp section here, I've got Oreos, I've got the typical cabinet maker's rasp, a small model maker's rasp, and a rat tail rasp. I've also found these Iwasaki files to be particularly useful. They really give a great almost sheen to the wood when you're working with them, and it's always handy to have a little bristle brush over here. This is a nylon brush. It's not steel or brass or anything like that, just to get rid of the shavings as soon as you've been working with them. I think this is certainly one tool that has to be cleaned immediately. If you don't, you tend to get all patches of rust and stuff clogging up on the inside over there. These 2 at the bottom are plane makers files. If you're not making your own planes, I wouldn't bother with those too much. If you listen to Gary Rogowski and to my podcast, you'll know that this 102 is the absolute little gem of the workshop. It doesn't have a adjustable mouth, doesn't have any of the features of the premium block planes, certainly doesn't have the same square sides, etc. But I use it on virtually every project. It lives here, right next to the Paul Sellers, let's call it a rag in a can, although you'll see in my case it's not a can. I made it see-through so I can actually see the oil inside, and a pair of calipers over there that I also use for sizing from time to time. I think the heart of any hand tool collection is having a look at measuring equipment. The Starrett square, I'll reserve judgment on it. I think you do need a good square. Whether you need to spend Starrett type money on a square, I'm not sure about. I certainly got on fine with these little engineer squares that I used in the beginning. Originally, I think you can see I used to have 3 sizes of them. Subsequently, I've got rid of the smallest one and I've got rid of the largest one. But I did get this handy little dovetail square over here from Sterling Toolworks. This is a absolute gem for just checking that your pins and your tails are perfectly perpendicular to the work. So I love this little guy. Keep him over here. I guess at some time I'll get around to making something where he fits properly, but for the moment he just sort of hooks in there. Over here I've got a birdcage awl. Use that for putting pilot holes into the work if I'm going to start nails or screws. I've got a marking knife, typical double beveled Japanese style, I guess, type marking knife over here. Certainly fantastic for marking your work on across the grain. For working with long grain marking, I've got a scrawl. I don't use this that often. I tend to use the knife most of the time, but occasionally when I'm working on something like oak where it becomes a bit gnarly and it tends to follow the grain, I'll get the scrawl out and use it for that. And then I've got a center punch over here. I'm not really sure why. At the time I thought it was a good idea and that I'd put one over here because I used it for starting holes, but the birdcage awl has largely replaced that. There's a few pens and pencils, sharpener over here. Found that you drill a couple of magnets into the top here, it certainly helps position them, and likewise on the side it can keep a small little handy rule or anything like that. I think the real star of the show is this tight mark gauge from Glendrake Toolworks. I used to have the Veritas, but I find that this really holds its setting much better, and I know that in many shops there's a whole range of them. They've got mortising gauges and multiples of this. I really find that having one of these, a good quality one of these, is much better in my opinion than having multiple ones that don't hold their settings. We've got a typical egg beater drill over here. I mentioned the router plane a little bit earlier, but the majority of the rest of the stuff over here is just clamping space. If we head up to the top, I've got my drill bits in a typical drill index that's over here at the top. Got a bit of oil and glue, cordless drill. I've said before I'm not a purist about hand tool work, and I use that quite often if there's repetitive work to be done. This stuff over here from Daikin, steel red layout fluid, I find it incredible for sharpening blades, marking square to the edge of the blades if you want to get those right. And then we have a few of the other planes. I've got my shooting plane here from Veritas, really nice for truing up 90 degrees or for making miters. To be honest, it was a bit of a luxury purchase, but my wife wanted me to do skirting boards, so I lied to her and said that I really needed to buy this to do the job. She got the skirting boards upstairs. I got a plane that I wanted. There's a few wooden ones at the back here, jack planes. You'll see some blades up at the top, German style horn planes. I've really just picked those up opportunistically whenever I've had the opportunity to. I've got 2 shoulder planes over here. These are old records that are restored at 42 and 73. They just simply have different size blades on them. I think that you need one good rabbiting option inside of your workshop, and for me what these do is it really gives me that opportunity to get right up to a line and plane when I need to. There's certainly joints that you just can't get into with the typical bench planes. I've got a record number 15 proof combination plane because I also have the simple plow plane, and I find that this it really's probably been an excessive or an unnecessary purchase as far as I'm concerned. I bought it because I got it at a good price, and you know, I guess like all of us, I'm tempted. I saw another, I think it's a record 45 that was up for sale the other day, and wow, that's a good price, let me buy it. The reality is that I'd suggest that you're much better off getting a good plow plane and not worrying about all the features that you can do with this. I certainly think that the dedicated wooden planes, and you can see there's quite a few that I've got over here, they're much better for the speciality things like doing beads. Again, running through these though, you know, this whole section of beading planes over here, that's really something that I got opportunistically. I think a few decent sizes, maybe a 1/4 inch, something slightly better. You could probably get away with 1 or 2 of those and have a great selection of planes. I've got hollow and rounds all the way down the side there, and over here there's some dado and grooving planes. Over here is one of the planes that I'm really looking forward to restoring. It's a 1/4 inch grooving plane. You use it for doing the bottom of your drawers. It makes a 1/4 inch groove, 1/4 inch away from the side of the stock and a 1/4 inch deep. It's a kind of speciality plane that certainly the combination planes could do the job, but I now don't have to fiddle with it. I don't have to set it up. It does one thing very well, very repeatably. And like the beading planes, I'd suggest that that's a better option than having the flexibility of a combination plane or a multi-use plane. I think there's a few other things that I'd talk about. I've spoken about the wooden planes up at the top. I've also got this really long jointer over here. Particularly when you're doing quite a lot of work, I find that the wooden plane bodies are amazing on the work, but certainly in terms of my normal work, I'm typically using the bench planes. Saws are pretty important. I've got a few of them. As you know from following me on Instagram, you would have seen the frame saw build. That's the monster, using it for resawing. 3 tooth bench there. It's really chews its way through wood. But for most of my work, I'm using Sandviks. I've got 2 of them, a 271 and a 275. It's 10 points per inch, 9 tooth per inch crosscut saw. And I've got the 4.5, 5.5 Sandvik 275 rip saw. These two, I love the steel. They do a great job in terms of the cutting. You'll see the handles leave a lot to be desired. At some point I want to take these off and reconstruct them so that they fit my hand. But the blades do a great job of breaking down stock. When it comes to joinery work, I've splurged a bit more there. Largest one I've got is the Bad Axe Beast, 18 inches. So this is great fun for large tenons and chopping pretty much any big cut where I want to do a rip style cut. Over here I've got the 16-inch equivalent. This is the crosscut version of that. And then I've got the 12-inch effectively the hybrid benchtop saw, and I've got a little dovetail saw that I use over there. You'll still see the original Veritas that I used right in the beginning. This is the carcass saw as they call it, and I've been playing with the little turning saw there. New Concepts coping saw, I use that for cutting out dovetail waste. It's something I've only recently gotten into. In fact, my son said to me the other day, he said, "Dad, that looks like a good idea, but it isn't really, is it?" And for quite a long time I conceded that he was probably right, but I find that if you're doing dovetails on panels, I'm building a wardrobe for my daughter, and those panels are about 18 inches across, 24 inches across. In terms of working with that, it's really nice to just be able to chop out the waste and remove it. Certainly think on dovetail boxes or something smaller, I'll just rather use a chisel, but on the larger work that's quite useful. And then there's the obligatory little Japanese flush cut saw which sits on the side here, was useful for trimming off the ends of mortises and pegs. So that in essence is my saw collection. I have ordered 2 panel saws from Florup Toolworks. They'll arrive at some point in the next couple of months, and I'll add that to the collection. But I think that as far as saws go, I'm really done in terms of that. I had a lot of Japanese saws that I started with in the beginning, and I've handed those over to the kids. I don't really use those much anymore. Certainly find that for the kids the pull helps rather than the push, but I quite like using the Western style of the saws. So these are a few of the speciality tools that I really like using. This is the Record 44. It's a simple plough plane. As I said earlier, in terms of the combination plane versus the plough plane, definitely recommend this guy. He's a lot of fun to use. Does one job, does it exceptionally well. This is a A151 spoke shave. Again, great tool for hogging off curved shapes, shaping any sort of work where you're not looking at straight lines and want a bit of a freehand feel to it. How many braces do you need? I thought I only needed 2. I had a little short throw one here and a long throw one here. This is quite a special guy. This was Bob Rosieski's. He put it up for auction on his website, and I thought it'd be really cool to have one of his tools sitting in my shop. So I bought that purely because of the previous owner, to be honest. And then the draw knife. A lot of fun restoring this. It was a complete rust bucket when I got it. First decent job of turning some handles, and I made these brass ferrules myself on the lathe, so I really enjoyed putting that together. So those are a few of the speciality tools that I use. You'll notice in the background I've got a frame saw. I'm not using that as of yet. I think it's something that I will get to, but I haven't tuned it up and used it. And there's a Record 78 that's lying over there. That's a moving Philister plane. Again, one of those things that seems like a good idea, and I know it's recommended a lot on the internet. I know Paul Sellers is particularly a big fan of that. It's not something that I use that often. I just haven't really had the requirement to use it. So these guys hang up there, and I think really once we've covered these guys off, I think we've gone through most of the tools that I use on a day-to-day basis. There's a few auger bits lying inside of drawers, etc. And possibly the last thing I should just talk about a little bit is my sharpening setup. So let's head on over and I'll give you a view of that. So this is my sharpening setup. I've got 4 DMT plates. I've got a extra coarse, fine, and an extra fine, and then a whole range of strops. I frankly don't think there's any real difference between horse leather and any other kind of leather you can get. I leave these lying around the shop in places where I think I'll need them. This was one of the first things I built. I keep it more from sentimental value than for real use, because the edges here, I'd certainly make them thinner if you were going to make a support for your own strop. Helps you get on the side when you're sharpening chisels. This is the Lie-Nielsen honing guide. I thought when I started that the Veritas MK2 would really be a better honing guide for me. It seemed to have all kinds of features and functions that the Lie-Nielsen didn't have, but really that certainly holds the work well, and I've moved from the Veritas to the Lie-Nielsen over time, and I'm glad that I've done that. So in essence, that's the sharpening setup. You've seen the tools. You've probably seen in the background a few pieces of lumber lying around, and that's my shop. In total, we're looking at about 12 feet by 9 feet if I look on the long axis and the short axis, and that's really meant that I've had to butt the bench up against the wall. I'm glad about that. It provides quite a solid planing environment here. And let's have a look at the bench. I've mentioned it a few times on the show, so I'll show you some of the features I built into it. So this is my hybrid workbench. It's half Ribot and half Nicholson. I couldn't make up my mind when I was looking at workbench designs as to what I'd rather enjoy, and I decided to go with a bit of both. So this side is fantastic for clamping. It's about 3 inches thick on the top here, but the other side is much better for edge planing. So let's take a look at the Ribot side, and we can have a look at what I've got underneath here. So one of the things in a small shop is just making use of the space you've got. So on the Ribot side, what I decided to do is only build half a bench at the bottom. What that lets me do is it lets me keep some of the appliances, like this shooting board over here, that can fit over the bench, but at the same time I can take my saw bench and I can stick it underneath. I've also put my jet air filter underneath the overhang on the one side, and at the back over here you can see I've got a shop vac that sits at the back there. So inside of this space there's really not a hell of a lot of free space when it's all packed in. We've got air filter, shop vac, appliances on a shelf, and a saw bench that fits in nicely under here. So let's go to the other side now. So this side is the Nicholson side, and this is my primary working side. I think 2 of the major planing operations, I'll show you how I handle them. So if you're edge planing, some simple 3/4 dowels, pop them in here, and I butt up against the crochet. That's a bit low. Just get that a bit higher for this one. Typically the planing force will hold it in place, but if you're worried about it, you can always use a hold fast and add in a little bit of additional oomph. So if I do that, certainly not going anywhere. Another common operation is face planing. I built a recessed planing stop over here. It's recessed into the bench and it's got a threaded wood screw. What that allows me to do is to reach underneath the bench and adjust to a height that is appropriate, or drop it right down if I want to use the full bench. So I butt that up against there, again, and leaving that free. Plane up against that and sort it out. It's a multi-purpose kind of device, because if you want to use something that's a little bit thicker like that, again, it's a matter of just twisting away until you're happy with the height. Looks good. And we're making some shavings. I don't want to pretend that I've got a completely viceless workbench. This is the guy that I use when I'm doing dovetailing or resawing. It's quite nice because the way I've built it in terms of the orientation is I can either put it on the edge of the workbench here, just drop some holdfasts in and get it in the right place, and I can use that then to do resawing down the length of the bench. But where it's more typically used is I put it on the end over here, and I use this for dovetailing. So again, I can hold it in place with holdfasts, but one of the things I found was that I often needed the holdfasts, so I drilled a few holes in the bench where I can stick bolts straight through, and that gives me then the option of freeing up the holdfast. So this is typically where it lives. One of the things I did do with it is I made it into an extensible table effect. So what you can do is you can add this on. This sits on the top over here, and there's some supporting structures for that, and that gives me a flat platform if I want to use it as a joinery bench. Let's take a look at what the platform looks like when it's all stuck together. And I've got a workbench table that I can work at. Okay, woodworms, so that's it for now. Time for me to get back to dovetailing some of those dovetails for my daughter's wardrobe. And it's a few turns of the screw. Can we do that again? Sorry. Just couldn't remember which way is clockwise and which is anti-clockwise.